Welcome to Clutch Talk 101. I'm gonna do a NASCAR segment here. I'm gonna explain my love for racing and how I became a fan. And I've been a NFL junkie my whole life, but NASCAR was my first sport that I really paid attention to details and I got interested in right away. Um, I became a fan in 2001. Ironically, the first race that I ever watched was the race Dale Earnhardt passed away. Uh, 2001. I was 9 years old, and I don't know. I take that back. I was eight. I was turning nine that year, and I didn't know much back then, but I knew my dad was a fan, and started watching that year. And my My dad watched in the mid 90s. He became a fan of NASCAR. Didn't really have a particular favorite. He watched Jeff Gordon quite like he was his guy, but he didn't really have a diehard favorite. Uh, Tony Stewart became a champion, I believe, in '01 and '01 or '02. And um, my dad became a fan of his. So I kind of followed the footsteps of my dad. I was already a Broncos fan because the first game I ever watched was Elway's last Super Bowl in '99. And so I just kind of followed Tony Stewart just because I was following my dad. Uh, I became a fan. I loved how fiery he was. I loved he took no crap from anybody. And I loved the way he drive. I going full force every single turn. Where that's how he got his nickname because you'd see the smoke coming off his tires in the corner. And that's why his name is Smoke. Uh, he to this day I've watched every year. He to this day is the most clutch driver I've ever seen. Next has to be Kevin Harvick, the closer. Clutch wise, I'm not talking greatest of all time. But then my dad took me to the inaugural um, Chicagoland race when they first built the track, and Kevin Harvick ended up winning that race. I wasn't quite a Kevin Harvick fan yet. I loved what he was doing when he was winning those races. The year that Earnhardt passed and he won Atlanta, barely beat Jeff Gordon in a photo finish. I remember watching that like it was yesterday. And I slowly, but eventually became a fan of Harvick. At this point, I was more of a Tony Stewart guy, and and Ward Burton. I had a Ward Burton shirt on. I remember that race. Tony Stewart spun out, and Kevin Harvick ended up winning. It was one of his first wins, I believe. It was one of his first five wins, and after that, I became a diehard fan. And Tony Stewart has been my favorite driver every single year, and he was very fun to watch, and he I loved his competitive fiery streak. I loved how he would call people out. I loved how he called NASCAR out. Anytime that there was a problem with it, a lot of people called him whiny, but he wasn't whining. That was demanding or being angry. Whining was what kind of what Jeff Gordon did, kind of what a lot of today's drivers do. Um, then in '09, I believe it was 2009, I went to Talladega and I went with my stepbrother and we were on the finish line and we were like I think row 3. So we had amazing seats. And mind you, the finish line is not where it normally is on a tri-oval. It's right past the end of the tri-oval. So we were right before turn 1. And that year they had the fins on the back and they were racing by twos. So the only way you could draft is partner up with somebody and you would see everybody racing just like this in groups of two. There was no pack racing. It was all just groups of two, just people pushing each other. It's really interesting. And I was a Tony Stewart fan, so at the end of the race I was kind of pulling for Ryan Newman given that he was I believe racing for Stewart Haas at the time, number 39. And And if he wasn't in the 39, I think it was right before he was in the 39. But I know Ryan Newman was in the lead, and Carl Edwards was right there too, and Brad Keselowski. Nobody had really ever heard of him yet. He was racing part time for JR Motorsports at the time. And last lap comes around, and it's Junior and Newman locked up, and or no, I can't believe I don't remember who were butt up against each other, but I know it was Newman, Edwards, Junior, and Brad Keselowski. Uh, Carl Edwards ended up flipping into the fence that race. My dad was at the race as well with my stepmom, and they were there over by the tri-oval, and they saw the wreck right in front of their face. So that that probably was a really cool moment to see. I believe there was only one person slightly injured. Nobody really got hurt. So that's good. But Brad Keselowski ended up getting his first win at Talladega when he was racing part time before he got his full time ride at Penske Racing. Uh, so after that, I was 1,000% sold into NASCAR, and a couple 2 years later, Tony Stewart makes his the best run any driver has ever made in the last 10 races, and winning 0 races in the regular season, the first 26 races, and then the playoffs come and he wins 5 out of the 10. That was the most clutch performance I have ever seen in any sport. NASCAR, it's a lot harder to win races than what people think, and especially if you're on a dry spell, and all of a sudden you're just winning a bunch of races again. Uh, and then that I remember the final race that him and Carl Edwards were either tied or a point or two apart, and Tony Stewart said, "You can come take a look at the trophy at my house when talking a bunch of smack, saying it's over, it's done." The race panned out, and Tony Stewart won. Edwards was actually winning a lot of that race, but Stewart came in through the clutch at the end and won the race and won the championship. And so that's why I'm a die hard Tony Stewart fan. And NASCAR is tied with NFL or close to for me. It's year round. You have the same drivers year in year out, and if there's new drivers, um, who's coming up if you're paying attention to the Xfinity series and the Truck series. Now I'm a Chase Briscoe fan. He grew up in a place or in Indiana, just a little bit away from where Tony Stewart grew up. He grew up just a couple hours away from St. Louis, where my whole family lives, and he grew up a Tony Stewart fan, and he ends up driving for him. And I like his attitude. I think he's a future phenom. I think he's got a championship run in him or two. I think that he'll end up winning some more races. He broke the ice in a win earlier this year at Phoenix. Phoenix being the one of the closest tracks to being a dirt track, given how slick it is and it being semi flat. Briscoe had a really good race. Every race that was really similar to a dirt track, Briscoe turned out. And Briscoe and Tony are the reason I'm into dirt racing now, sprint cars. I went to Knoxville a few years ago and met Tony Stewart. Tony Stewart was a real nice guy. He signed my shirt, and he cracked a joke with me because I I asked him to sign my shirt, and he's like, "Well, let me see your back." And I turned around, and I was still holding the shirt. He's like, "No," he laughed. He's like, "Put the shirt on your back, bud." I don't know. He was pretty laid back, and I was pretty impressed that he could hold a smile through that whole thing, and he seemed real genuine. So that was really cool. Uh, this year has been the most parity I've ever seen in NASCAR. A lot of drivers finally breaking out of their shell. A lot of unknowns breaking out of their shell. Um, the final four is going to be crazy this year. Right now, for the final four, I got to play favorites. I'm going Briscoe. Just I think he's going to do it on points. Ross Chastain, Denny Hamlin, and Chase Elliott. That's who I got for the final four. Not making any predictions on the winner yet. I got to see how these playoffs pan out a little bit, but that's who I got for my four. Ross Chastain at his peak has been. I think he's probably been the most consistent driver this year. Chase Elliott, he wins a lot of big races. He races clutch. He comes through. If he's running second all race, he's gonna end up with a late race pass. I like Chase Elliott too. He's very quiet and he does kind of lets his racing do the talking. Not a Hamlin fan, but he seems like he's in the Final Four every year. He is one driver I probably will not pick no matter what because I just don't think that he's going to end up with a championship ever. I think his ego is too big for the NASCAR guys just to be like, all right, you earned it. I feel like the same thing happened with Carl Edwards. I was actually a Carl Edwards fan, but he he wanted it so bad and thought that he was so good that he never got one. Same thing with I think that's going to happen with Hamlin. Uh, and I have Denny Hamlin, Chase Elliott, Denny Hamlin, Chase Elliott, uh, Briscoe, and Ross Chastain. So that's my final four for this year. But yeah, that's how I became a NASCAR fan. Uh, I highly recommend it for y'all football fans out there. It's I know y'all think that it's just driving in circles, but if you pay attention to the details and give it a shot and actually watch it in a willing attitude to like learn, not just like, oh, I gotta watch this. A lot of people don't like NASCAR, I feel, because it's on the same day as football, and they just downplay it. And it obviously isn't doesn't have the same kind of excitement as football, but it is fun to watch and easy to follow, and it's easy to get a favorite driver just by watching their personalities and by the way they drive. I hope y'all check out NASCAR and become a fan because it's definitely worth the watch. And they're putting a street race in there next year. They added a dirt race and now they're doing a street race, doing a lot more road courses, so there's a lot more diverse tracks where it's not just circuits. So yeah, I highly recommend it, watching NASCAR.